On today's show, Andrew Kelly is here, friend of the podcast, to talk about some trade stuff as the deadline rapidly approaches, about a week from when you're listening to this podcast, and the Hawks could be very busy in the next week. Also, some of the latest stuff on Dejounte Murray and Clint Capela, DeAndre Hunter, etc., and Trae Young, in or out when it comes to the All-Star game. We'll touch on all of what transpired there and much more, and all of that, and part one of two is on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1642 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday. In fact, it's February 1st. And on this podcast, I'm joined by a good friend of mine. I don't bug this person too often, but he is a team-building connoisseur and a trade machine connoisseur. Andrew Kelly, Peachtree Hoops is here. Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. We're recording this Thursday night. The Hawks have a home back-to-back Friday and Saturday, but we'll mostly talk about some trade stuff, I should say, on today's podcast. We should open, though, with just a few minutes ago, as we're recording this podcast, Trae Young was snubbed as an Eastern Conference All-Star. I'm not terribly shocked by this, although I did say when he was not named as a starter, I would be more bothered if he's not a reserve. I think he should be there. I want to be very clear about that. I think he should be there. But we just got this news, Andrew. What do you make of Trae not being selected? I guess he could be selected now as an injury replacement, but for now, not an All-Star.
Yeah, talking to you offline, I think neither of us were surprised by this. It's just, reading into the tea leaves, it seemed like this was coming. Certainly when you look at the season he's had holistically and, looking at his numbers he's put up this year, his play that's clearly visible on the court, I really think he should have been an All-Star. But with that said, I mean, with the record the Hawks have had, they're just not going to buy a lot of goodwill. So it's not too surprising to see him held out in the end. I think he will have a good chance to get in as an injury replacement. We know Julius Randle will be missing. Perhaps one other guy. We might get some other absence at some point that could help with that. But I don't think either of us are too shocked by it, even though we probably both agree that he has been having an All-Star caliber season.
Yeah, I don't want to derail the podcast too much. We have a lot to get to, but I do think that it's fair. I've seen this point from some Hawks fans, and I agree with it that Trey does not seem to get the benefit of the doubt for the win-loss record that some people do that are kind of on his same level. And yes, Trey has flaws. Nobody's saying he doesn't, but I think it's pretty clear it's not Trey's fault. The record is what the record is this year, if I had to say that out loud. So again, I get it. I think he's a better player than a couple guys that were selected in the East right now, and he has the numbers and all that stuff. But for whatever reason, all the close calls have not gone in Trey's direction when it comes to All-Star the last few years. So, like you said, not terribly surprising, but that does not mean that I agree with it, because I actually don't agree with it. But I guess we'll talk about that more later on in the coming, I guess, week or so, because the deadline's coming, and then of course the All-Star break is the week after that. Anyway, Andrew, we are a week away as we record this podcast from the trade deadline, and that is why you are here today. I want to start kind of big picture and ask you where your head's at as someone who follows this stuff very closely and is a Hawks observer even closer than that. We're kind of in this space right now where the rumor mill has slowed a bit around the Hawks. And we'll talk about players in a second. Dejounte Murray, I should say, as the most prominent example of this. But not a ton of like new stuff happening right now. We're kind of in the in-between period. What are you thinking right now? Like what's on your mind, and how pivotal is this? Because that's kind of the other thing that's about this. But with the Hawks is that they're kind of in this place where they could maybe do nothing. That would not make anybody happy, I don't think, around Atlanta. But we're in this place where they're messaging anyway. They don't have to do this major stuff right now.
Yeah, just quickly back to Trae. I mean, I think it is disappointing with the defensive improvements he's made this year, not to be rewarded for it. I mean, it's just so visible how much better he's played on the defensive end. And I think just from a buy-in perspective, like his post-game comments, I mean, I know he's not having the season team-wise that he was hoping to have, but he just seems like a more mature player to me. So it is disappointing to see him not get a chance to play as of now. So hopefully, he could perhaps make it as an injury substitute there and still make it. But yeah, it is disappointing. But on the trade front, there's a really good piece today. I read a little bit before the podcast on a website called Peachtree Hoops. You might be familiar with it, Brad.
I do know it fairly well, I believe. Yes.
It's by our friend Wes Morton. Just kind of giving an overview of where the Hawks are right now. I thought it was great. Like it was a really good encapsulation about where the team is right now. There's just kind of no running away from what they are at this point. You know, I was somebody along with Zach Lowe and other national commentators who were positive about the Hawks going into the season, but they have just not launched. Like it just has not happened for them. And at this point in the season, more than halfway, I think you have to be honest about where they are and start to consider the big picture. And right now, I think it's been pretty clear that the Trey and Dejounte pairing has just not worked for whatever reason. I mean, there's a lot of factors that can go into that. Chiefly, I would say on the defensive end, despite offense improvements that Dejounte has made, especially with his shooting and off-ball game. But at this point, with the record being what it is, I mean, you have to start to explore your options. I think there are some positive notes. Certainly, Jalen Johnson's play this season has even exceeded expectations for us. We were both high on him. Even when the Hawks made that pick, we thought it was the right pick at the time. But he's been even better than expected. I think really you have to look at him along with Trae as clearly the two key pillars for this team. And you want to be looking for ways that you can create flexibility and a more copacetic environment for them to thrive in. So you're looking for good role players, guys that can fit around them and enhance them. And at this point, Dejounte is just the elephant in the room. It does seem that things are heading towards them eventually dealing him. Maybe it's not this deadline. Like you said, it wouldn't be a shock if they stood pat. But that really is chief on their list right now, is sort of, I guess, correcting course there with just Dejounte specifically.
Yeah, it does seem like that is going to change at some point, barring another shift of some kind. And we'll talk more about Dejounte in a second, because he's, of course, the number one topic around the Hawks right now. But yeah, it's a good sort of baseline. I think sometimes we get lost in the day-to-day minutia of it all. And, the Hawks have been disappointing for this season. That is certainly worth noting. I think even the skeptics were not this low on the Hawks as they have been performing at this level so far, 2027 as we record this podcast. But I think it's important, like Wes did in that piece, which we certainly should read at Peachtree Hoops. It's not just this season. I mean, it's last season especially, because that was the post-Dejounte trade world. You could certainly argue that this core overall, the Trey, Hunter, Capela, Bogey, etc. core, not exactly the same guys that it's been the whole time. Of course, they moved on from Collins, they moved on from Herter, and they brought in Murray. But, this construction has been going on for several years now. And since the conference finals run, the last 3 years have not been exactly satisfying. And you could start again last year, post Murray. Like, I think that they expected that to be much more of a success than it was in year one. And now that carries over to year two, where we're more than halfway through the season. And they are, since they traded for Dejounte Murray, this is not because of Dejounte, just as a landmark point, they are sub 500 since that trade. Like that's actually pretty jarring to think about when you're already a pretty decent, low level playoff team at that moment when you trade for Dejounte Murray. You trade, significant capital. We'll leave it there in that trade. You haven't had any like crazy injury luck against you in the last season and a half, and you are basically 500, but you're actually a little bit below 500 in the last year and a half. Like it's a little bit of a scary reality, and that kind of makes it, just from I cover this podcast, I cover the team every day and do this podcast all the time. It's hard to kind of take a step back, but sometimes you kind of have to and be like, okay, this team is, the way that I would put it is they've just been pretty mid for a year and a half, 2 years. And like, that's not satisfying to anybody. So there are issues along the way. I've been critical and will be critical again of the cost cutting and all that stuff. But the reality is they just haven't been that good. That's two coaches, etc. So I don't know what that leaves you as far as like what the operating mindset should be. I think you talked about building around Trey and Jalen. That's their plan, it seems like. And there's been some mixed messages, I have to say, internally, externally, about what the Hawks are actually trying to do right now. It's a question I get a lot of people. They're like, hey, what are the Hawks trying to do? And it's like, the only thing that I know right now is that the Hawks want to build kind of around Trey and Jalen, and everything else is kind of up in the air. Like, how urgent are they to change things? All these guys that are still available. So in one sense, it's kind of a shrug, but on the other hand, it's kind of what you laid out. Like it is Trae, Jalen, and everybody else, and to figure out what kind of the formula should be moving forward and how much they care about this year. Because that's actually the other question is like, how much do you care about winning right now? And that's going to sound funny for a team that's 2027, but if they don't care at all about that, life becomes easier. You can kind of make transactions that are future focused. But if you still are trying to make the play in and trying to be the 8 seed or the 7 seed or whatever this year, then it becomes harder. Today's show is sponsored by eBay Motors. Our partners over there at eBay Motors have been teaming up with longtime fantasy basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring some of the best daily fantasy basketball picks each and every week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're actually going to provide you with some players that are guaranteed to fit on your fantasy basketball roster from Josh. Let's see right now who he has picked out for us this week's edition of eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And as always, there's a full list of guys to highlight from Josh. This time, we'll focus on Knicks forward Josh Hart. He notes that Hart is really in line to be a big winner minutes-wise due to the injury absence of Julius Randle, and Hart's minutes should be sky high right now. In fact, the last 2 games, he's averaged 41 minutes a game. 41 minutes a game with Tom Thibodeau at the helm in New York. He's also rebounding the ball at a super high level. Lots of assists in those games as well. He'll never be a fantasy star, will Josh Hart, but he stuffs the stat sheet all the way across the board. He's a fantastic rebounder for his position and also definitely useful with tons of minutes as long as Randle is out and probably beyond that as well. And again, Josh Lloyd from Longtime Fantasy Basketball is going to be helping you out with winning your fantasy championships. And eBay Motors knows a championship team is all about the way that each player fits on your roster, and they have to be a perfect fit, honestly. It's the same for your vehicle. I'm on the road a ton for work and going to Hawks games all over the place, and there'll be times when I've actually needed an upgrade for my car, or even just to find and fix a part or two, keep things running and on schedule with my vehicle. eBay Motors is the best place to do all of that. They have over 122 million parts. For your number one ride, you can also make sure that your car or truck stays running smoothly with the folks at eBay Motors. They have brake kits and LED headlights and roof racks, bumpers, whatever your vehicle happens to need. eBay Motors will have it covered for you with eBay Guaranteed Fit. It's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you are burning rubber and not burning cash. Keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. That is ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And we have a large sample size of on-court production to this point that has shown that Trey has been better with Dejounte off the court. I mean, I think sometimes people can get kind of carried away with like the on-off numbers at times, but when you have such a large like data set to work off of and it fits what you're seeing on the court, it's just hard to deny that there needs to be a pivot at this point. Going back to what you said about how they might strategize in the near future, I have a hard time seeing them wanting to sort of bottom this team out just for a number of reasons. I don't really see them just trading off everybody. I think they'll want to, at minimum, try to leave enough, even if they trade Murray, to have a path to at least a play in with a shot of making the playoffs via that route. So I don't see them just, even if everybody is up for grabs in theory, aside from maybe Trey and Jalen, I do think that they won't be willing sellers on a lot of these like role player types because they don't want to make the team terrible and completely miss the play-in if they can avoid that. And I think at least getting to the play-in could also be important for maintaining Trey's buy-in. So I think that is at least a reasonable goal, even if it's like a long-term, it doesn't matter that much. I could see why they would still value that even beyond just, the obvious, ownership issues. But what I could see is if they can find the right deal for Dejounte at the deadline, I think that's like the most obvious one. And we've talked about him a good bit. But also I think that Capela, and we're recording this now on February 1st, a little bit after the Steven Adams trade. And the Houston Rockets were connected in The Athletic as a team that was at least monitoring Capela. So I think that he's, after Dejounte, just for obvious reasons, I think he's really the guy that we'll see the most interest in moving from the Hawks standpoint. So I think that's going to be a really interesting one to follow in the days leading up to the deadline with Capela specifically, and we'll get into some other guys later too.
Yeah, for sure. And when I say, I think that's actually, I'm glad you brought this up, that, there's this idea in some of the corners of Hawks fandom, and I don't blame anybody for thinking this, but like about bottoming out this year, doing kind of a tank, like almost a full tank for the rest of the season. Number one, that's not realistic from what I understand. It's really hard to do that when you have Trey on the team. Number one, Trey wouldn't want to do that. If I know anything about Trey, he doesn't want to do that. And also, like I don't think the Hawks can be bad enough to have it be worth it. Basically, if it comes out at the end of the season, if we're in April and they are 2 games short of the play-in, and they can maybe not press the gas super hard to be the 11 or 12 seed versus the 10 seed, like the Mavs did last year, like sure, at that point I don't really care about the 10 seed personally. They might care about the 10 seed, whatever, but we're too early for that, I think. And the Hawks are currently in the 10 seed right now, and I think if they are healthy-ish, they are probably going to make the play in my guess. So that's part of the calculus here too. It's more like, what are you prioritizing? So for instance, we'll start talking about Dejounte a little bit now. The rumored Lakers package has been the one that's kind of been out there for a long time now. It's the chief asset in that deal is a 2029 first round pick. And then you either have to, fill in the money with D'Angelo Russell, probably, maybe go to another team, throw in a guy like Jalen Chifino or Max Christie. That deal makes you worse in the short term. I think everyone would acknowledge that, even the Hawks. At the same time, I'm not saying it's a great offer, because it's not, but it might be your best offer, most reasonable offer when you throw in the fact that Dejounte has agency too. His representatives probably are going to be in the mix here. The Lakers actively want him, et cetera, et cetera. But that is a move that is future facing. Not only if they don't like the pairing of Trae and Dejounte, but also you get the central asset of that return is this pick in the future from the Lakers. In a different way, Clint Capela, any deal for Capela is going to make you worse in the short term. And now I already hear people rolling their eyes. I'm not saying that you don't do it. In fact, even as the biggest Capela stan probably out there, I still advocated for them to trade Capela this summer, because they're not good enough to justify not doing it. And I think you want to clear the books, figure out what you have with the Kongwu, etc. But that kind of deal will make you worse. Trading Capela for what is probably going to be very little coming back is akin to what they did with Collins. Now, it's not exactly the same thing, but that deal makes you worse. Not because you are in love with the John Collins experience, but because you're just losing a good NBA player for very little, and Capela does help them. So it's like, Bogey's a similar one, and I think they actually like Bogey more than the rest of these guys, and it seems like they're trying to keep Bogey, but I think the same thing is true there. Any deal with Bogey is probably going to make you worse in the short term, and the benefit to that hopefully would be in the long term. So that's what I'm talking about when it comes to balance and like what they're actually looking for. Like even recently we saw, I'm sure you've seen this reporting out there from Mark Stein first, and I think St. Amick did it today on a podcast about how Quinn Snyder wants to keep Dejounte Murray. And I'm not surprised by that, because in general, this is why I don't like coaches being executives either at the same time, like Budenholzer was in Atlanta. Coaches want to win. Like coaches don't want to trade players. And especially if you look at the return for a player, and if the return for Dejounte is this Lakers package, no coach is going to love that. You know what I mean? Like coaches want to win that day or the next day.
They don't want to rebuild. Yeah. Coaches don't like to rebuild.
That's exactly what it is. So you can certainly quibble with that, and I'm not entirely sure that is even accurate. I'm not saying Mark's reporting is wrong or anything like that. It's just that we're kind of in silly season, we're in spokesman season, and like I'm not sure how much bearing that actually has. Just a good example of like there's so many competing voices and thought processes and goals that it's not cut and dry. I think that, to your point earlier, Capela is the one where it's like it makes the most sense to go ahead and move on from him if there's a landing spot, because you already have a Kongwu signed, Capela's getting older, all that stuff. It's money on your books. I purposely have not talked about the tax yet, which we'll talk about later on, I bet. But yeah, that's kind of what we're laying out here, just to say like there's a lot of sentiment. I'm sure you've seen it too. People are like, just trade them all. Trade Capela, trade Murray, trade Hunter. And it's like it's not that easy. It's just not. And people hate that answer, but it's really complicated to make even one of those trades, much less 2 or 3 of them in the next week.
Yeah, I think that was a great overview. I think their baseline is they would like to make the play-in. And if they get eliminated or just miss it, they can accept that. Like, hey, we didn't quite, achieve our goals this season, but we'll have a top 10 pick. You can sell Trae on that. And I think Trae is realistic. Like, he can see things with Dejounte aren't working and agree to be a good soldier while they kind of figure that out in the offseason. But that doesn't mean that he's going to endorse them signing off guys that he wants to play with, like a Bogdanovic or someone along those lines. They don't want to completely, gut this team and make it a full rebuild with him. I don't think he'll buy into that. But on the, I guess touching on both Dejounte and Capela, Dejounte, I've been trying to keep up with like what we like to, refer to as the slop, just for fun. Um, and it does kind of seem like they're seeking 2 first rounders and like a key player of some, of some importance. You can kind of interpret that in different ways. Um, Often it's very difficult in negotiations to get everything you want. Like I think that everybody grasps that. So it's going to be hard to get 2 first round picks and that player. You might have to compromise and maybe get 1 first. Another player you might like, okay, and then some other assets. Just among teams that we've seen that have been interested. I mean, the Lakers. There's a lot of stuff going on about LeBron wanting more help there. So they make sense as an obvious landing spot. Austin Reeves is somebody that defensively, I mean, we're not loving that fit with Trae, but there is a lot in his game to like. And I think we would all agree that his contract is a clear value. Austin Reeves is a type of player that even if he isn't the best fit with Atlanta, he's someone who could command a first round pick on the market. So he is a good asset to get back with Murray. So I think sort of like a realistic best case scenario, perhaps for Murray. Let's assume the Lakers, they can maybe get Hood Schifino just to get like kind of a young prospect. Maybe that 2029 first that they could dangle, and Austin Reeves. I mean, certainly the Lakers will push back on that. They'll want to do someone like D'Angelo Russell, try to preserve Reeves. Oh, yeah. But I think that's kind of like the best case scenario for the Hawks, where you at least get, you get to recoup some draft capital in that 29 pick. You do get Reeves, who's either could be interpreted as like a key player or somebody that you could flip for a future first, and then someone like a Schifino who's just, an entry guy that you could take a look at. So I think that all in all, that's probably about the best you could do for Murray. Are you kind of along that same lines, or?
Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. At the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What is one move that I can make to take my business to the next level in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs helps you to know that your success all depends on the team that you surround yourself with. And that's what LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to provide you with the right professionals for your team and hire them and get that done faster and for free. I've used LinkedIn Jobs quite a few times for my day job. It's actually great and as far as finding success and finding the right candidates and doing so quickly and easily. It's not just another job board at LinkedIn, and they have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it very easy and the best possible place to hire. Hiring is easy when you actually have that many qualified and quality candidates that are available to you. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate for their job within 24 hours. Achieving goals in the new year is huge for all of us. That includes myself, and finding the new team members that you're looking for can be incredibly important to accomplish all that you are trying to do this year. Small businesses rate LinkedIn jobs number 1 in delivering quality hires versus LinkedIn competitors, and they have the knowledge that small businesses are wearing so many hats right now and might not have the time or resources to do all the hiring on their own. Thankfully, though, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, it's quick, and it's easy. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That is linkedin.com/lockedonnba. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Yeah, it's tricky because I understand fully why Hawks fans are underwhelmed with this. The trouble with the Lakers in particular is that, number one, the Lakers want him. Like, there are teams that I think are interested in Dejounte. The team that has been out there, though, is like very clearly and actively, we want Dejounte Murray, is the Lakers. And unfortunately for the Hawks, the Lakers have very limited assets. Like, for instance, the 2 first-round pick package that's been reported, it got reported again this week by Mike Scotto. It's been out there a lot about what the Hawks are asking for Dejounte. They don't have 2. The Lakers can only trade 1, and they only have 1. So, okay, start with 1. You throw in Jalen Hood-Schifino because he was their first-round pick last year, but no matter what you think about him, he was a mid to late first-round pick a year ago. He's played almost none. So his value is not really a first-round pick anymore on the market. He's probably second-round pick, maybe a good second-round pick kind of market-wise, but his value is not exactly a first-round pick right now as it is. They have Max Christie, etc. They seem to be dug in on the Austin Reeves thing, and I'll keep it short. Austin Reeves, like you did a good job with that. He's a very good contract. He's a very good offensive player. His defense is really bad, and the fact that he is deemed to be untouchable is like kind of laughable in a lot of ways to me. Like, he's not a guy who should be untouchable for any organization. It is kind of what it is. He's pretty overrated at this point, I think. But if the Lakers truly are like, we're not trading Austin Reeves, and that is the messaging. I don't know if it's going to change next week, but if they're not going to do that, and the Hawks, I think, are smartly, even if you don't love the pairing of Reeves and Trae, and I don't, like you sort of allude to there either, it's not really about that. You're asking for Austin Reeves because that's the best guy they can offer you. They're not going to offer you LeBron or exactly. AD. It's like, okay, we want your pick and we want Austin Reeves. Those are the two things the Lakers can offer you that are actually good value pieces, and they want both of them. And I don't blame them for that. But yeah, I mean, could they get more from somebody else? Maybe. It's just that the reporting and even the intel that's not being reported, stuff that I'm hearing behind the scenes, there's not a team that's like super obviously in right now on Dejounte for what the Hawks are wanting. You know, the Knicks have been floated out there. They have a pretty logical package too. It's Quentin Grimes as like the player, Evan Fournier as the matching salary, and then they have a bunch of picks in the future. Now they're not great picks, but if they offered two of them, that's probably enough. But they don't want to probably do two of them, if I had to guess, given the reporting that's been out there on that. The other teams too, like there's Brooklyn has some interest. They have more of an interesting package. Like they have more like ready-made players, like Andrew's guy, Dorian Finney-Smith might be in the mix there.
Man, how funny would that be if it finally happened and that was the way they got it done? There's a few angles with Brooklyn too, because they do have a good number of picks now too. I mean, they have Dinwiddie's contract, who's expiring, I believe, that falls in along the same lines. They could tuck in with Dejounte, maybe send back like a Garrison Matthews, just because the Hawks hate to take money back.
There's even the nuclear option. My friend Tower Jones has been bringing up. There's the Ben Simmons option, where the Nets take on maybe Capela or Hunter plus Murray, and then they send Ben back to Atlanta. I'm not saying it's going to happen.
It's like one of those things where like you wish for like Ben Simmons in 2020, and then like a monkey paw curls, and like you get him like 4 years later when he's like deteriorated. But yeah, I mean, there's a few angles there. I mean, like Dinwiddie, maybe a first, even two. The Nets are pretty liberal with picks right now. They have a lot of them. But it is tough to pick out just one suitor for him. Like I do kind of like the Lakers package the most, even if I'm not crazy about Reeves, just because the asset you're getting back, I think, is valuable. And just, I mean, even if I don't really like that fit, and I don't like long term with Trey, it would at least be fun to watch like him and Trey and Jalen Johnson, all plus passers in a Quinn Snyder offense, like play out like a dud season. Like they would, get their numbers, enhance their value, yada yada. But yeah, I mean, it's tough to find that exact fit for Dejounte. I just kind of come back to the Lakers again and again. If it's not going to be, I just don't know that the Nets are ready to make that kind of move. But the other guy too, I mean, we've talked about Dejounte a good bit, is Capela. And now that we've seen the Steven Adams trade, I think we've sort of set the market for Capela. And the Hawks are already kind of up against it in negotiation, just because everybody knows that they took Okongwu, number 6 overall, and they gave him an extension. And the Hawks have not done the best job, I think, like it's fair to say, with their assets in the past few years. So it hurts their negotiating power. I think for him, I was looking at some teams in preparation for that. And it's funny because the Rockets did come up, but a team like Oklahoma City, I think, is a team that could benefit from a center. When you look through their contracts for like money that can match, Davis Bertans is somebody that pops up, and he has, I think, like a $5 million guarantee on his deal next year. So that's something you could take, a minimum amount of dead money and actually clear a little over $15 million if you were to agree to like a Capela swap. But maybe something like a Bertans in a 2 or 3 seconds. They gave up, I believe it's 5 seconds to get Sadiq Bey. So it wouldn't be the worst thing to reload some second round picks to, facilitate some future moves. So I think that they kind of make sense as a dance partner there. But other than that, it's hard to see a lot of teams that jump out for Capela. I mean, the Clippers maybe kind of on the margins could be interesting. But yeah, I think the Adams parameters kind of set the tone for a future Capela deal if that goes down.
Something I've been trying to say for a while is that it's not necessarily that the league doesn't value Capela. Like I've seen that sentiment out there, and I get it. He's not the same guy he was before. Even I will acknowledge that. He's taken he's a half step slower. He's not the same finisher around the rim, et cetera, et cetera. I get all that. With that said, he would help a lot of teams. The trouble is, in season, it's harder to make the kind of deal because he's making $22 million a year. And you have to find a team that, A, needs a center. And by the way, it has to be a good team that needs a center, because if it's a bad team, why are they trading for Clint Capela right now? It has to be a good team, and they have to have an in-season need for a better than normal backup center. Like, no one's trading for Capela actively to have him play 15 minutes a game. I don't think. Maybe there's a hybrid role, like an OKC, like you mentioned. Maybe he plays some with Chet and then he's back up to Chet. That makes some sense. I've seen like Houston would have been the same thing. If Houston had done it, it would have been like, Sengun is a good player, but he's not like a 35-minute a game player probably on defense, et cetera, et cetera. So like you're looking for a very narrow window with Clint in season, and it's hard because he is I still think that Clint's a starting center, but he's a lower end starting center now.
I think he's
And
still a fine starting center, and
me
it's
too.
also hard too, just in season because, like, obviously centers are so important for your defense. It's hard to integrate that in season because it
Yeah,
often means you have to change your scheme and things like that.
right. And if you go down the list, I mean, we won't do that on this podcast, but I've done this exercise. Go down the list of the standings from like best teams to worst teams. How many of those teams need a 25 minute a game center right now? Bad enough to trade for a guy making starter money. Like the list is not long, man. It's not, and that's nobody's fault. I mean, other than you could say that, and I have said that the Hawks should trade in the summer, and I still believe that. But like once they didn't do that, it was always going to be hard in season. Like you would have kind of needed an injury. Like Memphis was a team that I know you and I talked about offline when Adams went down, pre-jaw injury and all that. It would have been like they actually made a lot of sense for Capella. But once jaw went down, they're not going to buy now. They just sold Steve Adams for a future facing move. And beyond that, like the Pelicans, like, yeah, he's better than Valanciunas probably, but what does that actually mean? You know what I mean? Like there's all kinds of deals that like kind of if you squint you can kind of see it. But long story short, like I've still not heard a team, and this doesn't mean that it's not out there, but I've not heard a team that's like that I'm like, okay, that's it for Capella, like, or any intel on that. So they would like to trade Clint at this point. I think still some of the same caveats apply that have applied in the past. Trey likes playing with Clint a lot. I think given what Quinn has been reported to think about Dejounte, I think Quinn would probably not like to trade Clint because Quinn probably knows that Clint helps them. At the same time, it's time to do it. It's just that I'm not sure that deal is out there, and they're not. They shouldn't. Well, this is my opinion. They shouldn't pay. They shouldn't pay assets to get off Clint. Do you agree with me on that? Right now, I would not be giving away capital to trade Clint personally.
No, and I don't think his value has reached a point with 1 year left on his deal, and he's still a fine
Yeah,
starting center. Like I would probably tier him with Steven Adams. Both
they
guys.
could also move him this summer if they wanted to. They won't get a lot back, but I do think that if they're desperate enough to do it in July, they can just get him to go somewhere for very little return if they had to. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and and with where the Hawks are now, you just can't give up assets to get off like a 1 year deal like
Yeah,
that either.
I would
Like,
not. I would not do that. But
yeah,
I've seen that too because and I get it. People are very frustrated with Clint. He kind of has a unique ability to bother people with his finishing and all that stuff. But
yeah.
yeah, I think it would be good for them. I think you and I agree based on this conversation and others to move Clint if they're able to and get some positive value. Even if it's second round picks or something, a second round pick, something like that. I think they just clear the books a little bit.
Yeah.
They should do
And
that.
even if you don't get, the return almost isn't the goal. Like you really need to see more of a Kongwu. I think we both
Yeah,
agree with that. We like to see more time with a Kongwu along with the starters, especially Jalen Johnson, to kind of get a sense for how that could look. They've invested in his future already. They already have a high pick invested in him. So you would like to see a larger sample of a Kongwu as a starting center with, where they are, where you're not a team that is looking to contend this year, obviously. So you would like to get a better assessment of a Kongwu just to figure out if he could be the answer this year. I really haven't loved a Kongwu season this year. Like he has not made the step
yeah,
forward that I've expected him to make. So I think in some ways, it's even more important now to try to get a longer look at him just to see, because you might have to make a call on him as well before long. Just because he does have an entire contract coming up. He's coming off his rookie deal this year. So I think that the return is almost kind of beside the point for Capela. You'd like to get a
yeah.
couple, 2 or 3 seconds if you could, but a lot of it is just you're clearing some salary from next year, even if you have to take like a little bit back, and you're getting more time with a Kongu to kind of feel out whether he can be the guy or not at the 5 for the future.
Yeah, to your point, I tweeted out some. It wasn't about these two players, but I tweeted out some of the more the advanced numbers, the EPMs, the LeBrons, etc. Those kind of high level advanced metrics, and none of them are particularly kind to a Kongwu this year. And they actually all list Capella as being comfortably better than a Kongwu. And I think I got some replies from Hawks fans that were dismissing the metrics because they were higher on Capella on Capella than a Kongwu. And I just have to say like that. I still think Capella's better. I do. Right now, today.
I do too. And I also think that a lot of it too is just the type of personnel that the Hawks have. Like it just works better when you have more of a traditional anchor center, like somebody
Yeah,
that can just kind of raise the floor on defense, because they don't have perimeter defenders. Like someone
it's
like
it's true.
Capella, he makes the most sense, or not, excuse me, with like a Congo, he makes the most sense. Like if you have a team like Boston where you have good perimeter defenders, and then you could take advantage of his ability to have versatility and defend at the level and all these other things that can, raise his ceiling for you in the playoffs. Like that's really like the appeal of a Kongwu. But if you don't have, good perimeter defenders to start with, it's just a lot more of an ask for him to be an impactful player. That's why I think it's really important they get a longer look at him to kind of figure out which direction they want to go with center.
No, I totally agree. I think that's part of it. And I'm not saying that Capela's the same guy. He's not the same guy he used to be. But it's, to your point, I don't think that Okongwu has forced their hand. That's the way that I keep putting it to people.
Yeah.
It's like he's not been so good that the Hawks are like, okay, got to make the move. And that's maybe part of the problem is that they keep kicking the can on the road. And this is a Hawks problem that I've had for several years now. I'm sure you've heard me rant about this before. They just don't seem to make these timely decisions. They always seem to wait too long on all of these moves. And Capela's kind of the same thing in some respects. Like they're still holding on, and it's a new day. Hopefully, it's a new front office, new coach, all that stuff. But that's where we are. All right, that is all with part 1 of myself and Andrew Kelly talking all things trade deadline. We'll have part 2 coming to you in your feeds right now, actually. So subscribe to the podcast if you're not a subscriber already. Spotify, Apple, Overcast on the audio side, as well as YouTube on the video side for every single episode of this show. Also, please leave ratings and reviews if you want to do that. I would always appreciate that support to help us grow the podcast. Also, spread the word for us if you have Hawks fans in your life, family, friends, etc. Follow us on Twitter/X at LockedOnHawks. Follow me there as well at BT Rowland. Also, write about the Hawks regularly at patreon.com/BT Rowland. And again, part 2 should be available in your podcast feed of choice right now. And with all that said, we'll see you all next time.